Welcome to Capitalize Education's 5-minute professional learning bite to support educators across the world during uncertain times. Remember, at Capitalize Education, we believe that educators achieve more together than they do alone. In this week's professional learning bite, we're going to look at how we can support students on the autism spectrum who have challenges with executive functioning using the UDL framework. I love this quote. Once you have met one child on the autism spectrum, you have met one child on the autism spectrum. That's because every student on the spectrum is so different. For this reason, one pedagogical approach won't work. Teachers need a diverse range of strategies in their tool shed. Students on the autism spectrum often demonstrate challenges in the areas of social communication and repetitive behaviors and restricted interests. Whilst there are many characteristics of students on the autism spectrum, this week we're going to focus on challenges associated with executive functioning. Executive functioning consists of three main skills: working memory, the ability to think flexibly, and self-control. Executive functioning is responsible for many skills. So a student who has challenges with executive functioning will have difficulties paying attention, organizing, planning, and prioritizing activities, starting tasks, staying focused on those tasks, and completing the tasks, understanding different points of view, regulating their emotions, and keeping track of what they are doing. Let's contextualize these characteristics within a hypothetical student. This week's hypothetical student has difficulties with working memory. Beth Saggers from the Queensland University of Technology states that every person on the autism spectrum is unique and their needs will be reflected differently. Whilst the characteristics of students on the autism spectrum may be similar, it's important to delve deeper into the functional impact so that we can determine how we can support students. The Australian federal government defines functional impact as the impact on curriculum access and participation, communication, mobility, personal care, and social participation. So it's the impact that the characteristics of autism have whilst a student is at school. For our student who has difficulties with working memory, it's important to delve deeper into the functional impact of those characteristics so we can determine how to best support the student. Whilst the characteristic of the student is that they have difficulties with working memory, the functional impact is that the student cannot remember how to complete tasks in mathematics as soon as the teacher has finished modelling them. As such, the student regularly asks the teacher for assistance. So what can we do to support this student in our classrooms? I love this quote from Epstein. "No tool is omnicompetent. There is no such thing as a master key that will unlock all doors." Rather than wielding a single tool, generalists have managed to collect and protect an entire tool shed, and they show the power of range in a hyper-specialized world. As an educator, do you have a range of pedagogical strategies in your tool shed? The Universal Design Learning Framework from CAST provides us with a range of tools that we can incorporate in our tool shed to support students with disability and diverse learning needs. To best determine the most effective UDL checkpoints to support the student, we have to go back to the characteristic. For this student, it is difficulties with working memory. The difficulties with working memory mean that the student cannot remember how to complete tasks in mathematics, so they're regularly asking their teacher for help on how to complete tasks. To support this student using the UDL framework, we can look at checkpoint 6.1, which is guiding appropriate goal setting, and checkpoint 9.2, which is supporting the student to facilitate personal coping skills and strategies. What could this look like within a classroom? A good way to support a student who has difficulties with working memory to remember how to complete a task in mathematics is to conduct a task analysis. Task analysis as a pedagogical approach is named by the nationally consistent collection of data as an example of a supplementary adjustment. Before we look at how we can conduct a task analysis, we need to contextualize the pedagogical approach within the approved curriculum, which is the Australian curriculum mathematics. Today we're going to focus on year 3. In the content descriptor, it states, model and represent unit fractions including half, quarter, third, and fifth, and their multiples to a complete whole. Step 1 in a task analysis involves choosing a task that has a definitive start and end rather than an open-ended task or a task that involves abstract thinking. The activity we will be doing for the task analysis is modeling and representing one chord in concrete and visual materials. Step 2 in a task analysis involves creating a series of small steps to complete the task. To complete the task using both concrete materials and visual images, I've broken the task into a series of 8 very small steps. When conducting a task analysis, you will sometimes need to visually or verbally prompt a student. So step 3 involves developing a prompting hierarchy that can be used during the task analysis. Hume and colleagues at the University of North Carolina have created a prompting hierarchy that could be used, starting with full physical prompting as the most form of prompting, all the way down to visual prompts. To conduct a task analysis, there always needs to be some form of record-keeping document or framework that the teacher can use to record the tasks completed by the student. This is an example of a record-keeping sheet that could be used for the task. So it has all of the 8 steps of the task analysis on the left-hand column. The middle column is where a teacher could record if prompting is needed. And the final column involves where the teacher ticks a task if the student completes it independently. If any resources need to be developed for the task analysis, step 5 involves the development of these resources. For this task analysis, as it involves developing fractions, I need 2 examples of fractions, one using colors and one blank. Once the task analysis has been developed and all resources organized, it is really important that the teacher runs through the task analysis to see if it makes sense. This could be demonstrated to someone to see if they understand what to do. In the next video, I'll be demonstrating the steps in the task analysis. These are the concrete materials for the task. They are clothespins. These are the pens I'm going to use for the activity, and this is the recording sheet. I first start by identifying the colour used in the concrete materials. The colour is blue. I'm going to record the number of coloured concrete materials here. Now, I count the number of concrete materials. 1, 2, 3, 4. I take my pen and I record the number of concrete materials here. So 4. I now count the number of coloured concrete materials, which is 1. So I write 1 here. So I now have 1 divided by a line 4. So I write it over here, 1 over 4, which is, as a fraction, 1/4 or 1/4. Done. Step 7 of the task analysis is where the teacher starts working with the student. The teacher models each step of the task analysis in order for the student. The teacher should verbalize during each step how to complete the step. During the task analysis, the student needs to follow each step modeled by the teacher. If a student can complete a step independently, the teacher and the student move on to the next one. If the student requires prompting, this should be identified on the record-keeping sheet, and the teacher and the student start from the first step again. On this record-keeping sheet, the student has completed the first 3 steps of the task analysis independently, so the teacher should then model the 4th step. If the student requires any form of prompting, the teacher should refer back to the prompting hierarchy they've developed to determine which is the best form of prompting to use for the challenge experienced by the student. On this record-keeping sheet, the student was able to complete the first 5 tasks independently. However, at the 6th step, counting the coloured concrete materials, the student struggled, so the teacher engaged in verbal prompting. Because the student needed to be verbally prompted in the task analysis, the student and the teacher go back to the very first step in the task analysis and begin again. Once a student is able to complete all of the steps of the task analysis independently, the student should run through the task again before the teacher determines that the student is able to do it independently. When a student is able to complete each one of the tasks independently, the teacher ticks it in the independent column. Remember, once a student is able to complete each step in the task analysis independently, they need to run through the task one more time to assure that the student understands what to do. This is great evidence of the support that is provided for a student on the autism spectrum who has executive functioning difficulties. That is our professional learning bite for this week. This week, we looked at how we can support a student on the autism spectrum with difficulties with executive functioning through the Universal Design for Learning framework. Remember, it's important that educators work together, not in isolation. As the African proverb goes, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. See you next week.